Hey, Toronto. Welcome to How's the Market podcast. I'm Dave Dubbin, Senior Vice President and Broker here at Sotheby's.
I'm Ken Mazurek, Regional Managing Broker with Sotheby's International Realty. And we have a very special guest with us today.
I'm Bryan. I've been with Sotheby's for about 2 years, and I've been a broker for about 48 years.
We have a prize of unbelievable value if you hit the like and subscribe button and share with a friend. We'll be tracking and let you know.
It's 1 in a million. I was just going to say every time you hit the like button, an angel gets its wings. So
You're not encouraging people to create new accounts to add the like button.
I would never advocate for that, but I will also not stop it. Now, the word legend is thrown about very loosely these days, but can you give us your kind of real estate story that got you from 48 years to sitting here chatting with Dave and I?
When I was in high school, I did a gardening and landscaping business, and one of my clients was a company called Gibson Willoughby, and they would have me come over and look after places that were empty. And the broker said, "Hey, you should get into real estate because you'd be really good at it." I didn't know at the time that every broker in real estate said the same thing to everybody. But I listened to him, and I got my license in 1973. And back then, all you had to do was fog a mirror. And it was a week process.
They didn't even check the pulse.
No,
Just breathing.
no, that's for your broker's license. You had to have a pulse and fog the mirror. So I got my license right out of high school, and I've been doing this ever since.
Amazing. And so, obviously, starting with yourself in the 70s, the real estate market's changed. Tell us about your current team now. I know it's become a family affair. Why don't you tell everyone kind of the composition of your team and what you're up to these days?
I work with my youngest son, Brad, and my older son works in the Sotheby's office downtown. And he was with me for about 15 years, branched out on his own downtown, and Brad stayed with me. Brad's with me off and on for about 10 years.
Do you remember your first deal?
Yeah, I do.
Let me check the archive.
Funny you should ask. So this is 1974. My first deal, I had a listing, and I had my own buyer, but it was a bidding war, believe it or not, in 1974. And another buyer came in and beat me out on the price, if you can believe it.
What was that, by $100?
I know the price would be under $100,000, but I can't remember what it was, 80 or 90.
Would that also be your most memorable deal? Probably not if it didn't jump to your mind. What was maybe the most memorable, craziest deal that you've done that you can disclose?
There's been a lot of, probably the ones that are most memorable is the one that didn't go through. There used to be a chunk of land on the Queensway by the South Kingsway. It was a bingo hall. I think it had about 10 acres. There was a street beside it, and I was working for a broker that worked with developers. And the developer said, "I want to buy that bingo hall and the street beside it." And there was a company there, I think you've heard of Sealy Mattress. So Sealy Mattress was one of the properties, bingo hall. And we had an offer for, I think, $1 million. And this is 1974. For $1 million, the bingo hall said, "Sell for $1.2 million." My guy said, "Are you crazy? Nobody pays $1.2 million for 10 acres of land in Toronto."
Never be worth that much.
That's the peak for sure.
That was one of the better ones.
Also one of the better ones. And then obviously it goes into a way that you can't. Did it get anywhere? Did it actually get to paper? Or was it just people saying you're crazy at 1-2?
I think it took 15 years for somebody to actually buy it and develop it. I don't even know the name of the project now, but it's the one at the bottom end of South Kingsway.
I think it's Southport.
Southport's the older buildings to the north. To me, it's newer. To you would know the difference.
That was before I was born.
You were in real estate when I was merely a figment of imagination in my
Yes.
parents' mind somewhere.
Yes.
So yeah, let's talk about how's the market.
To me, the market's always the same. I believe that the banks probably control the price of housing because they have a thing called the GDS, gross debt service ratio. That allows the borrower to pay, sliding scale, but it's between 32 and 40% of their gross income towards debt on housing. So it's mortgage, principal interest payments, and taxes, and half the heat, and I think they throw in maintenance now a little bit. If you go over that range, they don't lend you the money. So as incomes rise, so do the property values. Because you're making more money, the GDS slides up. In my personal opinion, the market's always the same because we have that limit on pricing.
And Dave, your observations at the moment?
I don't know if the spring market's here. It feels like it. We've gone from a very slow buyer engagement and not a whole lot of listings out to listings starting to move. And I checked the daily updates on MLS and starting to see in the core 130, 150 properties come out. That includes rentals. So like your one bedrooms hitting the market. Definitely more listings coming out, and we're starting to see multiple offers. I think you even had a bully offer on one of your listings. What was that, last week or 2 weeks ago?
Ryan, my oldest son, and Brad and I have been involved in about 6 offers in the last 2 weeks. 5 of them were bully offers, and 1 was just all by itself. So yeah, the market's back. The buyer interest is back in spite of the higher rates.
It seems like with the Bank of Canada's announcement on trying to pause and giving some forward guidance that more and more confidence is back in buyers. Hopefully see some better product come out and they don't have to deal with what's been sitting there for a while. There hasn't been much choice. We've been actively looking with a number of people, and it's like you go through and everything sort of has a blemish, or you're like, okay, the basement on this one's not great, or there's no balcony, or whatever it is. It just doesn't get close enough to pull the trigger for buyers.
I think we talked once again sitting in my chair and kind of seeing a bunch of different markets all across Southwest Ontario, in the GTA, 416, and some parts of the 905. I'm referring more to Oakville, Mississauga. We're seeing.
Ken, this is a Toronto only podcast.
Okay, sorry, I apologize. Well, let's include Toronto and the core and the 416. We can focus it just to the 416, but what we're seeing is in these established neighborhoods and communities, properties are getting 40, 50, 60, 70 showings again, which that's something we haven't seen for almost a full calendar year. We're seeing properties get double-digit offers. They're getting preemptive offers or bully offers, if I may use the proper real estate lingo. But it's interesting, kind of that shift. I think when we talked about it earlier, Dave, I said life goes on at some point and people have to move on with what they're doing, right? There's birth, deaths, divorces, marriage, kids, like eventually you have to look. And right now, we don't have the final stats for January, but it's looking like we're going to be at a 20-year low for transactions, but we're going to be at a 20-year low for new listings. And it's just, there's nothing really out there that catches people's eyes. So if you do have an attractive property that's well presented, well priced, it's seeing an uptick. The big question is, as we go forward, will we start to see a rise in inventory? And I also mentioned this earlier, one of my 2023 predictors was, what's the absorption rate going to be? Are new listings going to be absorbed? You had mentioned as well, a lot of properties that didn't get their price in 2022 went the rental route. They might try once again to list and get into this buy and sell side. So that might bring some new inventory. Is there going to be enough demand? But at the moment, it's definitely been a big uptick from what we've seen for several months now, which I find quite fascinating.
So Bryan, what advice do you have for buyers today?
Or perhaps your everlasting advice. The one thing you need to know as a buyer.
I think the one thing you need to know as a buyer is don't pay attention to the media. Don't pay attention to your friends. Just buy what you think you want. Ultimately, that's all that matters. The average price in Toronto has doubled every 10 years. And we've gone through 22% interest rates. We've gone through 9/11. We've gone through everything. And they still double every 10 years. So don't worry about the value. Just get the house you want. Or actually get as close to what you want as you can, but that's the main thing.
And on the other foot, for sellers,
well,
that's a lot more market condition dependent, I think, than buyers even.
Over the years, I've figured, in my personal opinion, only about 30% of the houses on the market are really for sale. A lot of people say, if I get my price, I'll sell. So I can sell for too high and buy for too low, I'm in there. They're not going to. So those guys are out of the marketplace. They just don't know it. And the 20 to 30% that are selling, they're doing the right thing. Believe me, folks, it's always price. That's what drives everything.
Agreed. It probably leads us into our next conversation. Real estate now, obviously, there's so many different startups. We've introduced so much technology. We're no longer doing offers by carrier pigeon, as you might have done at the beginning of your career, by horse and buggy. But we've seen such a shift. I know back in the 70s and 80s, you were probably working with, was it the old MLS book? Like the book that came out every day with the sheets that you tore out? Whereas now you can get it real time to your phone. Your clients are getting the same information. Have we made real estate too complex? As all the technology cluttered essentially the core of our business, which is advising our clients and assisting them in buying and selling?
I think we've gotten carried away what we think our role is. Advising our clients, ultimately, what do we know? Like, we don't, and what does, not just us, but anybody, what do we know is coming down the road? What we have to do is listen to what they need, why they think they need it, and guide them in that direction. The market stat stuff, to me, it's fluff.
Why would you say something so brave yet so controversial? I get your point. Perhaps I'll rephrase it. As someone who relies a lot on market stats, I think sometimes as we over financialize housing, people look at it like the stock market, right? They always say, oh, it's like an investment. No, an investment is you go onto your broker account, you hit the buy or sell button, and you can instantly buy and sell a stock without a second thought. Not the same with a home. It's a far less liquid asset. It takes more time of sale, and it's your home. It has such an emotional value and intrinsic value, things that a market stat's not going to cover. I'd love to hear you build on why you don't place too much emphasis on market stats.
There's a bunch of things I could say about that. The first thing that sort of leaps to mind is somebody asked Warren Buffett back in the day when he started out, he said, Warren Buffett was able to figure out the value of a company by scratching it out in the back of an envelope. He said, do you still buy companies that way? And he said, I do, but the research department goes through all their role to come up with a value. And it's not much different than what I come up with on the back of the envelope. And he says, why do you do this? And he said, to me, the reason we're doing it now is because we can. Back then, we couldn't. And I'm thinking, that's what we see now. Back in the 70s and 80s, nobody knew what the average price of a house was. Nobody knew how long things had been on the market. But they bought and sold, and the market continued.
It's trying to define fair market value. And in the end, it comes down to what a buyer and seller agree upon. Whether you're buying a property or you're buying a business, it's got to make sense for both people. That's what the fair market value is, because it's always shifting. And there's going to be different dynamics, whether it's like, hey, I'd like you to leave the window coverings or a chandelier. Everyone's going to put different value on it, and there's so many different variables to assess what that market value is.
It comes down to two people in one property.
Yeah.
That's all it ever is.
To your point of need, whenever I look at the stats, I always take it through the lens of there's always, especially a primary residence, an investment property is a lot easier. It's more of an exercise of numbers. If I'm buying an investment condo, it's basically, okay, is this going to cash flow? Is this a capital play? When it's your primary residence, it's different. I always like to distinguish, I think you buy an asset. You're not buying an investment. You're buying an asset, and you're buying a place that might have extra meaning. Whether it's a school district that you really want your kids in, maybe you want to be near grandparents. Someone might value proximity because grandma and grandpa live down the street. How do you quantify that in a number? So to your point, I agree in a sense that there are some things that the market stats you can just never capture. Someone says, I need to be in this neighborhood. I have elderly parents. They live down the street. I'm the primary caregiver. I want them to see their grandkids. They might pay more than market value. And then it becomes part of our market stats. But these aren't always totally rational decisions from a purely economic standpoint. But then whenever has economics been purely rational?
So I don't want to be too controversial here.
You want to be invited back. We understand.
My burning question over the last couple of years has been, the average price that we see has everything thrown into it, all the houses that come on the market. So what happens is somebody will buy a house, tear it down and build something new and sell it for twice the value. That boosts the average price. I'm not that good at math, but I'm thinking it didn't really affect the house next door by double. It didn't really affect the marketplace by a whole lot, but it boosted the average price up. And then we see renovations doing the same thing. And as time went on, we've seen a lot of this go on, and it's probably a bigger segment of the market than I realized, but I'm thinking that's a big thing that's driving the average price going up at this time.
Yeah, there's been the updates to properties. And we could speculate, or I could give my theories on why that's changed, but a lot of it is people renovating the homes that they're in. They get done by maybe flippers. You get developers who are doing that. And eventually what you really have are rare commodities. Toronto especially, that's the way I look at it, is if you want to be in the core 416 area, there's only a finite number of single family, and you're not making any more with what we have. And to your point then, if you have an area that starts out as, like up where I live, it started out as a kind of a 1950s subdivision, and it's all post-war bungalows and side splits and back splits. Those are starting to disappear and make way for the 3-story, 3,500 square foot homes. And obviously that doesn't mean my home has doubled in value, but it does have an effect. The value of my home relative, because now the finished product of what it can be is worth more should someone decide to tear it down.
I think what you're getting to also is the mindset of homeowners looking at it as an asset rather than it's a home. So it's like, oh, okay, I've got this much equity. How can I pull some out and invest in my business, or take that vacation that I want, or renovate it and improve and double down on it? When you get that mindset as looking as an asset and how do we grow it, people will look at when they're buying it or selling it. They're like, okay, this is an asset that's going to appreciate. Somebody once told me real estate goes up, doubles every 10 years. So I want that to happen to my home. And once you're bought in, you totally believe it.
I like to use the Game of Thrones analogy. It's once you're in the game, you're in it. And obviously, it's so interdependent on your neighborhood, your location, the property type, the school district. So I think market stats, I always enjoy them because they give you a snapshot of activity. But once again, we talk about area all the way like Peel region, you're going up to Barrie, out to Whitby, Oshawa, Durham. It's such a huge landmass that we're covering. And there's so many little different factors for all these neighborhoods. What might be happening in the Kingsway is going to be totally different from King City, but they're all lumped into the Trebs average price. That's where I think we kind of have made real estate, maybe sometimes it gets overcomplicated. You know, everyone's trying to figure out the algorithms and estimates and all the what's my house worth. But it's difficult unless you really have someone who knows the neighborhood, knows more directly comparable properties. And once again, what someone's willing to pay for it. Just because one house got X doesn't mean you're getting, we've seen, I'm sure you've seen it more than I have, but you see it all the time. Oh, my neighbor down the street got this. Mine's a little bit better, so I deserve more. You might not get more. It's the way it goes.
We'll see that present itself on an offer night. Say you get 6 offers, you're going to get a range of offers, and some might be 20% where you feel below where the value is. Some might be right on, some might be above it. You always get a range of it. And I think that's one of the things about real estate that everyone loves. It's got their own opinion of value on real estate. And, I put this much value on the open concept, or I don't like open concept anymore. I need a 2-car garage. You got to have a 2-car garage. Everyone's different and everyone has a different viewpoint on it. And everyone agrees that their viewpoint's right.
Well, absolutely. Market value is probably my favorite misused real estate term. It's underpriced by market value. Isn't. Market value is determined once it's sold. That's now the market value. Everything, to your point before that, is an opinion of value. I think it's worth this. I believe it's worth that. I think an educated buyer will pay this for it. But that's all hyperbole until you actually have a firm contract. Now you have market value. That is actually the established market value. So I crack up every time when someone says, oh, they priced it like 30% under market value, 20% under market value. We don't know that until we're done at the end of this process. The opinion is it's been priced under there. And obviously you can tell if every home in a neighborhood is selling for 1.5 million and a house comes out at 1 million. Obviously we're being a little aggressive here and it's a little out of touch with what's happening, but it still is an opinion nonetheless.
One of my favorite questions to ask is, if you've been in real estate this long, I'm pretty sure you've seen some stuff, have some interesting stories for us. Any ones that come to mind that you could share?
When is carpeted bathroom coming back?
I hope it's soon.
Wallpaper on the ceilings. What else? What is coming down the pipe, or what's coming back?
Yeah, there's a lot. Shag carpet was a good one too.
Shag carpet in the washroom.
Yeah.
Shag carpet with a sunken living room, the whole vibe.
I don't know, but as you guys were talking, I was thinking location is the driving factor for pricing. And every property is different. The guy next door to you may have the identical house, but for some reason his house has a different value because maybe it's on a corner lot. We lived on a street, they called us the poor side of the street. The houses across the street were about 3 times the value of ours. And so if somebody said, what street do you live on? You tell them and they woo. And I said, yeah, but we live on the poor side. I met our neighbor across the street one night. We were putting out the garbage. He was coming out in his house coat, coming out in the dark. And I saw him and I said, hi, I'm the guy. He goes, I know who you are. And he said, but he was looking up and down the street. He said, but I can't let anybody see us talking because you're on that side of the street. We became good friends, but that's how important location is.
Yeah, it can be. We could spend a whole episode talking about micro-segregation and differences. There was a street that I used to regularly trade on, named after the school in the area, but halfway up the street, the school district changes. Literally the second you cross that threshold and you're on the other school district, values drop around 15-20%. It's incredible. It can't be overstated how finite and fickle it can be sometimes.
Where you need the local knowledge.
Yeah, because if you look at it from a glance, how do you account for all these things in general market statistics? Or how do you do it as an uneducated buyer? You can't. What value do you put on that? And even within different parts of the city. One part of the city, there might be a lot of homes with family rooms. So that's a very common thing in a house. If you don't have one, it's a problem. Another one, it might be very rare. So it's not as big of an issue. It's not an important thing to have.
Those are the variables that the algorithms struggle to pick up on. There's so many different areas that it's hard for them to factor that in. You're just looking at average price per square foot or average price per lot size, number of bedrooms. It can do that, and that's pretty basic, but it's that local knowledge that's so important.
And even to your point, it's what someone wants in a house. It's what a buyer wants. And if a buyer says, I want 10 homes on a street, they're all roughly identical. One has a walkout. Someone just says, I want a walkout. I've always wanted a walkout in my basement. They pay extra. Is it worth more intrinsically? Yes, no. We could argue from a cost to build perspective. People sometimes just pay more. I used to sell a lot of Victorian houses. the maintenance and upkeep on them is like double, if not triple, than a newer home. But someone says, I want stained glass windows, I want 12-foot, I want the Victorian facade. And I get it. I love Victorian homes too. But then you get your heating bill for the first year and you're like, what have I done to myself? Or you're dealing with lath and plaster walls. But once again, these are things that intrinsically, how do you value that? You can't really go to a costing manual and say, okay, it's worth X. It's more, okay, someone says, I really want this. And especially in Toronto, some of our neighborhoods, I find people are just, I've looked at that home for 10, 15 years. Every day I walked home from work. And when it came up for sale, I said, I'm going to buy it. And it can be that simple. It's not rocket science.
Figuring out would be, but you're right. It's simple. And it comes down to the individual person and the individual property. And I'm thinking interest rates don't really matter a little bit, but that if people want something, they're going to get it.
What's the funniest thing, perhaps, if you remember, you've had someone say, I want to ensure that is in the contract that has to come with the sale of the house? Or the craziest thing that had to be removed from a house because you're like, we do not want that here when we move in.
We sold a house, and after closing, the buyer called me up and said, there's a safe in my backyard, and you should have to remove that. And so I called the seller. I said, the safe, oh, yeah, we forgot about that. It's been there since we bought the house. And it cost thousands of dollars to get it dug up and taken out. And nobody knew why it was there. It was there.
I had a home inspector one time sniff out an oil tank. Been out of service for decades. Hadn't been used, like 2-3 cellars back. No one had any knowledge of it. He's in the basement, and it's like watching a bloodhound. He's like, I smell oil. I'm like, okay, we might not be able to use this man anymore. Like, he's gone too far now. We called a specific agency. They did tests, and sure enough, buried oil tank under the front porch, hadn't been used in 30 years. And it's like, okay, here's a $28,000 bill to excavate it.
Well, the first house I bought had an underground oil tank. Nobody cared. We sold it, and the people bought it. We didn't disclose it because we didn't have to. And I drove by one day and they were digging it out years later. But at the time they were digging it out, it wasn't an issue either. They just wanted to switch to gas and get rid of the tank.
At one point, we were wrapping our pipes in asbestos and saying, great job.
I think one of the most interesting stories I heard was it was a deal done off market. A friend of mine ended up buying it. They got wind that it was a divorce. And I guess it got pretty bitter. But when they finally got possession of the house, they went in and all the toilet seats had been removed. I guess that's technically not a fixture. Maybe you want to switch that when you get a house. It came down to the sellers were feuding so much that that was the small victory for one of them on the way out, is that they were going to keep those.
There's nothing nicer than a toilet seat.
The nice padded ones that go,
Yeah. That's understandable.
And so one other question I have, you talked about location, the greatest real estate saying possibly ever made. What is the worst cliche that you hear all the time out there?
There's a lot of them.
I'm curious which one grinds your gears. I have one. I'm happy to disclose it, but I'd love to hear yours.
Tell me what you're thinking.
The worst one that I hear all the time, it makes me want to bounce off the wall, is there's never been a better time to buy or sell. Is like the worst statement I think hands down I've ever heard, because it's such an individualized process. You're ready to buy when you're ready to buy. You're ready to sell when you're ready to sell. And more people get burned trying to time a market than they do just operating within the current conditions of it. So for me, it's like you buy and sell when you're ready, when you're okay with the risk, when your life situation's as sorted as it can be and you're financially ready for it.
You can buy and sell well in any market. It's just you have to understand the lay of the land and how to navigate it.
Exactly.
That's all there is to it. And that's always an interesting one. The spin doctor that's always like, oh, it's a great time to buy because of, okay, last month it was a great time to buy because the complete opposite.
And prices have never been higher basically since 2010 onwards up until this past year. Prices have never been higher. Okay, I guess the market's going to keep moving, go up, go down. But what am I going to do? Sell my house and just hang out in a park? Like, I have somewhere to go. I've got kids. I've got a family. I could go on for 20 minutes. I think it's the worst saying, and I see it all the time, and it just drives me nuts, because to me, buying and selling, once again, like you talked about, is about one buyer and one seller, and it just has to be right for them. Like every market has risks, whether it's a buyer's market, seller's market, high interest rates, low interest rates, lots of activity, no activity, always has risks. Every real estate transaction has risk. You can buy a house, the home inspection looks great, everything's amazing, you got the interest rate of your dreams, and there's an electrical fire and your house is burned down the week you move in. Like, stuff happens. Or we get torrential rains and it floods. So for me, it's just, What's your risk tolerance? Is it the right time for you and potentially your family? I'm not going to keep ranting. Hopefully that's given you some.
Your therapy sessions.
The therapy is almost done after that one, yeah.
I bought my first property when I was in high school. And I'm thinking,
An abstract concept to everyone else in this
I have
room.
no idea why anybody worries about whether they should buy or sell. It's just beyond my imagination.
That's wild. So what is the cliche then? What is the cliche that gets you? I'm sure you see them. I'm sure you've heard them all.
It bothers me when I hear people say I flipped a house. The real definition of flipping a house is you get a contract agreed to and you sell that contract before closing. That's a flip.
Thank you.
The wholesaling. Yeah, the
Or signing a house. Yeah.
Yeah, signing, not closing, fixing it up. That's stupid. Because there's all sorts of, the closing costs now are a killer.
Or, yeah.
And flipping it, if you can sell an offer for $50,000, that's pretty good.
Without any risk on the backside, right? I would agree. You're right, because that is technically what a flip is, to flip the contract to someone else, not turn the actual house over and spend $200-300. And now in Toronto, gosh, I'm sure you guys see it too. If you're buying a bungalow for $1 million, $1.2, $1.3, $1.5, depending on the neighborhood, and you're spending $1 million to put something new there. You're spending $300, $400, $500 a square foot. This is not a cheap operation here. There's a lot of risk involved to it, which we've had a market that's let a lot of people do it and do it successfully. But I would agree, not the definition.
It's a genius in an upward market. Can't do any wrong. I think it's more of a frustration on my end, but it's the agents that they hound you for information. Oh, my buyer's super interested. Oh, can you make arrangements to get me in outside the showing time? You're really asking for a ton of favors and then dead quiet.
Right after you
They won't reply to a text, call. They're messaging you on LinkedIn before, and then it's just gone. It's like, just give me the courtesy that, no, they didn't like it for this reason. Make it up. I don't care. But it's, if you're going to go to that extent to get me to accommodate your special requests, then have the courtesy to let us know that it's not going to happen rather than just ghosting.
Yeah, we don't need to be real estate ghosted here. The other thing I wanted to touch on, you are one of the rare breed, although it seems to have a bit of vogue in coming back. You actually door knock. You are a regular door knocker.
Yeah.
Get out there, meet the people like a politician before an election. Yeah. Why do you like to do it? What do you find the benefits are for you, for your business, and even just for the people in the neighborhood that I'm sure like, okay, this guy, Bryan's coming again. Lock the door, turn down the lights, draw the curtains, lie on the floor.
First of all, it's fun because you meet a lot of interesting people, and the guys that answer the door, they don't have to, so they're answering because they want to. One of my best ones was, like, this was a long time ago. I was door knocking. It was a hot summer's day, and I could see the lady down the hall, and she was elderly, and I knocked on the door, and she said, yeah. And I said, I'm Bryan Barnes. Are you thinking of moving next year or so? And she said, are you married? And I said, yes. And she said, ah, shit. I said, do you say that to everybody? He says, I'm 82 years old. What have I got to lose?
Shooter's got to shoot.
So I got lots of stories. It's fun. And I have people now who call me because I door knocked 20 years ago and we're friends. Like, it's great.
I mean, to go back to the overcomplicating our business as we sit here doing a podcast in a room surrounded by technology, the irony is not lost on me, but I used to do when I was selling a lot of open houses and then door knocking all around the neighborhood. Hey, I'm hosting an open house. Come on by. Great to show you the house, let you learn more about it. Sometimes you forget that a lot of this business is still meeting people. It's belly to belly business.
It's
looking someone in the
relationships.
eye.
That's it. Relationships.
100%.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We really appreciate it. To our one and only guest, the infamous Bryan Barnes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
It has been our pleasure. And listen, may your floorboards never squeak. And we look forward to talking to you sometime soon. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.